Welcome back to a Save It for Parts tool review. Today we're checking out the TTC-450 CNC router from TwoTrees. Now, I've used TwoTrees products before. I tested out their laser engraver and I was really happy with that. So when they offered to send me a CNC router, I thought, yeah, let's give it a shot. I've never used a CNC router before, so this should be a really interesting product to test. I'm not actually sure if I have room to open this here in my office, but it's really cold outside and I don't want to set it up in the garage just yet. All right, we have some loose parts here just on the top of the packaging. Looks like these are mills and drill heads. So I believe this is the main unit here, and it's got pretty detailed instructions here on how everything goes together. And I remember the TwoTrees laser was not difficult to put together. It did take about an hour, so we'll see how long this one takes to assemble. This is basically a tiny little lathe or rotary mill. That's kind of fun. This is an upgraded motor, so I think this is a bigger motor than the one that comes stock with the CNC router, so we can do a little bit heavier duty machining with this. I brought the stuff out here to the garage because I don't have space to set it up in the house, and I suspect that it might be a little bit messy trying to do routering in the house. It's really cold outside, so we're going to try to get this done while my hands still have feeling in them. They offered to send this to me late last year, and it took until February to show up. So between tariffs and import restrictions and just general confusion over international trade, it did take a while to show up. But now that it's here in the coldest part of the year, we're going to try to get it set up and tested. There's just a ton of stuff in here. I imagine this is going to take quite some time to put it all together. A lot of these parts look the same, but fortunately some of them are labeled. This one isn't, but I think it's just a clone of this guy. It's also nice that most of the fasteners and small parts are labeled because there are a ton of small parts. And these are not quite symmetrical. We've got recessed spots for the bolts on this side and just flush on this side. I think that's correct. The manual does say to pay attention to the direction of the left side 2020 profile, which I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think that means that the recessed ones go on the left. I've already screwed this up. I didn't put these side rails in far enough, so the density plate here doesn't match up. So these rails need to come in one more. It was kind of hard to tell that from the picture in the manual. Hopefully I'm making all my mistakes early in the process here where it's not too hard to fix. So I'm trying to get all of these wires connected before I put the drag chain guard on the side here, and the instructions are a little unclear. It says, first Y-axis limit switch connected to the control box terminals to plug the wireless sequence requirements. Okay. Also, the little retainer clip on this one snapped off the second that I plugged it in, so now it's just kind of falling out. So I'm going to have to glue that together or something. So far, this hasn't been physically difficult to assemble, just confusing, but this step of snapping the end of the drag chain into this little retainer clip, yeah, this needs like 3 hands, and they all have to be smaller than my hand. I don't know if there's actually any way to do this step. As soon as I get these little tabs into the holes they're supposed to go in, everything just pops out again. They don't actually lock into place. Now, the dodgy translation in the manual makes it sound so easy. Just snap the 2 pieces together. All right, well, first I better fix this connection where the little retainer broke. Alright, that sucked, but we have the drag chain installed. So there is this profile cover seal stuff that's supposed to clip into the metal here and hold the wires in place, but it doesn't really work very well. It doesn't always seat in there correctly, and when it does, it just pops out again. So yeah, I don't know. The few of these that do work are literally painful to install because you have to just really force them in there with your fingers inside the sharp piece of this channel, so that it really sucks. I didn't even notice that one of these wires has actually come out right there, has actually broken on this plug for the Y-axis motor. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get that back in there. I might have to chop this off and like redo this entire plug. I hate to give anything a bad review before I've even gotten a chance to turn it on, but I am really unhappy with some of the design choices here. These channel covers are awful. The quality control on these wiring connectors, not good. And the way that that drag chain connected to this cover plate, also not good. And I hate to say it, but that's already starting to color my opinion of this thing, even during the assembly step. Yeah, it still doesn't hold in place at all. I'm still gonna have to glue it. I'm not really sure if I can solder this wire back into place either because it'll just melt the plastic housing. So I might just have to force it in there next to the contact and hot glue that as well. The hot glue gun isn't listed as a suggested tool for the assembly here, but I'm just having to leave the thing plugged in because I keep having to use it to get things back together. The manual is definitely usable, but it is super inconsistent about how much detail it goes into. For example, we have an entire page here telling you how to plug one cable in. Just a couple pages later, we have about 18 actions mashed into one step. So, yeah, we're apparently just supposed to do all this stuff at once, plug it in, turn it on, adjust it, get the motor in there. I can kind of figure out what's going on, but the manual is not super easy to follow. Yeah, everything seems to work so far. Okay, that was a bad sound. That makes me think one of the limit switches is not working because it just kept moving past its home position. I also don't like the way that this wire drags across the drag chain. The manual doesn't really show any of the cables in position along the top, so I don't know where they're supposed to be. I think the little limit switch plates that I installed here are supposed to be slightly out from the edge here because the motor will actually grind it a little too far. So again, that wasn't super obvious in the manual, so I'm gonna have to mess with that. I don't like the way this is dragging. It's starting to wear through this nylon cable guard already. There's like loose pieces of nylon. So, okay, we are finally done with assembly of the CNC router. This was another 2 hours today, of which probably an hour was just fighting the channel covers and this left side thing. But, so probably about 4 hours total assembly time. That's definitely a lot slower than the other TwoTrees device I tried out, their laser engraver. I really like that laser engraver. That's still one of my favorite laser engravers, and it only took about an hour to put it all together. This thing takes 4 times as long, so definitely not easy to assemble, not simple to assemble. I would go so far as to say very frustrating to assemble, but I think we have it all together. I'm going to move it. It's not in a great place right now. It doesn't actually fit on this part of the workbench, so we're going to move it to another spot. And the next part of the manual is all about engraving. So I think now that we have it assembled, we can start using it, but my fingers and toes are cold, so I'm going to set this aside again, and we're going to come back out here once I've figured out, A, where are these wires supposed to go? Is there a better way to route these wires so that they're not just rubbing across the drag chain? And then B, how do we actually start engraving stuff? All right, I'm back. I have the CNC machine set up in a better part of the workbench where it actually fits. I can put the laptop to control it next to it here. I can have all the extra parts and whatnot in the back. And I've looked into some videos on this. I've taken kind of a very brief crash course in CNC routing. I still don't know what I'm doing. I've still never done CNC routing before, but we can at least get started with this, try it, and hopefully not make too many mistakes or destroy too many things. I couldn't find a good answer to the wiring harness in the back here. It just seems like it just does that. A couple other people who've done reviews on this have complained about that as well. I ended up putting some duct tape around the wire where it rubs on the drag chain, so hopefully that'll keep it a little more protected and I can just replace that duct tape when it wears out. But yeah, this wire here is definitely not big enough. It seems like maybe the drag chain is upside down, but this is the way the manual said to install it, so I guess that's just the way it is. I did notice when I moved it, the power wire has popped off of the motor, and now the other power wire has popped off. So these aren't very secure on this little 80-watt motor. In fact, they're just popping off here again anytime I touch the wire. But I might not use the 80-watt motor for very long. I might switch over to the 500-watt motor pretty quickly. I do want to test it with the stock motor that comes with the unit just to see how that works, but I probably won't use this little baby motor too much. Now, one resource that was really helpful for learning about this was Kathleen Chapman over at The Gadgeteer. Her article goes into extreme depth about how this unit works, all kinds of stuff about CNC machines, about what each little tool head does. She's pretty much required reading if you're a newbie like me for this, so I'll throw a link to her article down in the description. I have no affiliation with Kathleen or The Gadgeteer. I just found her article to be really helpful. One thing I learned is that this thing is a Z probe. This is how the machine knows how far the tool tip is from the work surface. Now, some of the articles show an additional box that lives on the back of the Z-axis that this plugs into. Mine doesn't have that box, but there is a connector on the bottom of the brain here marked ZP, which I assume means Z probe. I'm going to start with the default I think the 30-degree carving cutter. I found a spare tackle box that I can use to organize all the little bits and pieces that came with this thing. That is a super helpful addition to this set. So I think we go into the probe menu here, and it will go down and touch that metal contact, and that's how it knows where the Z-axis is. I've gotten a little spoiled with the really fast-moving stepper motors on the laser engravers. This thing just creeps along. I could make a cup of tea and read a book in the time it takes for that Z-probe to come down and hit the contact. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to leave the Z-probe connected all the time or just put it away somewhere. For how flimsy these little connectors were, I kind of don't want to plug this in and unplug it all the time. So I'm using this candle program. This is kind of cool. It actually shows me on the screen, it shows me where the spindle is on the work surface. I don't actually know how to tell the software that I want this to be the origin. It keeps jumping in on the screen from where I want it to start. I think I click the send it button. Alright, I have no idea what that's doing or where it's going. I expected it to come down and start carving a design, but it decided to just migrate off that direction. Let's try this again. And it's still migrating over there. Okay, now I think it's trying to cut, but it's cutting up in the air. So even after watching a bunch of videos on this, reading the manual, going through the software, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no clue how to operate this thing. I guess I need to reprobe that Z-axis for like the 5th time. All right, 3rd time's the charm, maybe? And once again, I have no idea what it's doing. It's doing something completely different than last time. Last time, at least, it looked like it was maybe doing a carving motion, just up in the air. Now it's wandering over there again. So, I'm stumped. It seems like it's working this time. They said it was going to take 2.5 hours. I left it alone and came back to check after 20 minutes, and it had locked up. The spindle was still running, but the XY was not moving, so it was just sitting there spinning in place. So how I got it to start working in the first place, I had to use a combination of the control panel and the computer. So if I tried to set the XY home position in the candle software, that didn't work, and that's when it would just migrate off to the side. I had to go into here in the touch panel, put the spindle where I wanted it, and then erase or clear the XY position, set the homing position with the control panel, and it behaves differently if I do it in candle versus on here for homing the height of that Z-axis. I'm stumbling around with the terminology here because I'm very unfamiliar with this, and I'm probably mixing up my words, but yeah, basically you have to set up some things on the touch panel, some things on the candle software, and it's all still very confusing about what you do in which place. I'm going to try another test file, a much simpler one this time. We're going to test that one out, and then maybe we'll move on, we'll use the bigger motor. Well, that looks okay, but there's a lot of stuff stuck in here. Maybe it's just too small. I have no idea how to scale this up in Candle. Maybe I need another program for that. If any of these cuts look weird or amateurish, it's because I'm an amateur, and it shouldn't be blamed on the machine. It should be blamed on user error, because I still don't know the correct bit, speeds, rotary speed, movement speed. I don't know any of the settings. Let's just jump ahead to this piece of plastic that TwoTrees included with the unit. So far, I think most of my time with this unit has been spent probing the Z-axis. It would be nice if it had some kind of an automatic feature for that, but it doesn't. Alright, and the Z-axis came out wrong again. I don't know what the deal is with this thing. I need to make some kind of a checklist of just what hoops to jump through to make this work, because it does not seem intuitive at all. It's like sometimes I have to clear the XY, clear the Z, then probe the Z, but I have to raise the Z so that it has room to clear. If I probe it too low, it runs into stuff. Then I have to go over to Candle and clear the XY or set position 0. It's very confusing. Alright, that seems to have been the correct order of operations, so it has worked, and man, it blasts microplastics everywhere. Apparently there is an additional vacuum that you can get that bolts right onto this and just sucks the debris off of the working surface. I didn't get that vacuum. I could rig up a shop vac just stuck next to the little spinning part here, and I could just make a vacuum, or I can shop vac stuff off afterwards. Let's try the flour sample again, this time on the plastic sheet. Alright, I'm actually gonna stop trying to drive this into the plastic. All it's doing is melting the plastics. In fact, I'm gonna set the plastic aside because I don't know how to use it. I don't know what the correct settings are to cut something into this without just making a melty mess. So I'm gonna switch back to working with wood, and we are gonna go ahead and switch to the bigger motor because I can hear this motor complaining as it drives through the plastic. It sounds like it's working really hard, and it's getting a little bit warm. Kind of a hassle to get the little motor on and off. You have to have the carriage for the Z-axis all the way down, and then you have to get in behind here and find these 3 screws. I think that the bigger motor is actually going to be easier to mount to the carriage. It's even colder outside today, so my fingers are really having trouble getting these small things out, especially the small sharp working bit here. I do have heat in the garage, but it only comes up to about 40 degrees, so it is not... Oh, and I will never see that again. Now, the downside of this big motor and big controller is, where do I put it? I already have the CNC machine and the laptop taking up all the space here between this tool and the other bench, so I don't quite know where to put this. I guess I could mount it under the bench, or I could stick it on the wall. I guess for now we'll just put it behind the laptop. And that is one more thing that has to be plugged in. So I've already used up the 2 closest outlets for the CNC base unit and the laptop. We're going to have to find a 3rd outlet for the motor power supply. This big motor did not come with any instructions. It's got a little sticker here with a QR code to a tutorial video, but I don't have reliable Wi-Fi in the garage at the moment, so we're gonna have to go back inside to watch the tutorial video and figure out how this goes in. Alright, we're going to try the flour again. We're using the same 30-degree V-bit, big beefy motor, the 500 watt. I think I can go into this override section of Candle and change the feed rate, so hopefully that'll speed things up a little bit. Let's just go with 200% because I want to see this flour in 1 hour and 15 minutes instead of 2.5 hours. So then I think when we hit start, I can then manually crank up the speed on the motor controller over here. Alright, that little flower looks pretty nice. There are a few rough spots. I think that would clean up with a little file, which there is a little file included in the kit, or some small sandpaper or something. I think that looks really nice, and it definitely went faster with the 500 watt motor. So next up we have the rotary tool, which does come with a manual, although it's not really clear about how you connect this to the unit. We have some additional wires that run this. It's called a 4th axis, but there isn't really a plug on my machine for a 4th axis. This piece is basically a tiny little lathe. We've got these little chuck teeth here, and we've got this spindle thing on the back. When I looked online, it seems like there's supposed to be another plug underneath the control box here. So it's supposed to be right in here next to a Wi-Fi antenna. Mine doesn't have that. It doesn't have the Wi-Fi antenna, and it doesn't have the 4th axis port. If we're just rotating here in one place, we don't really need to go back and forth in the Y direction, just the X direction along the very top of our rotating cylinder. So I think one way to use this is to unplug the X-axis, plug it into this guy, just have the Y-axis, or vice versa, depending on which way we orient this on the spoil board. Basically, we clamp this down underneath of our XY system, and we just have it move in one direction while this rotates. Actually, mounting this thing down to the spoil board is pretty straightforward. We have just a number of slots here that we can line up with the bolt holes, and then we get our spindle end lined up. the same distance from the edge of the board. We bolt that down, and then we can stick our dowel or cup or whatever we want to rotate into the chucks and the spindle here. It does actually talk about using this with candle. It looks like we have to go in and modify a pulse setting depending on the motherboard, a subtractive ratio, a motor step angle. Then we have to go in and modify some symbol settings. I guess it's possible the candle just treats this as the y-axis, so it just rotates a cylinder versus moving the cutting head back and forth. So I guess that's one workaround here, and that maybe ties in with unplugging the x-axis, plugging it into this, versus having a dedicated fourth axis plug on the control box. Can you tell I'm confused by the rotary tool? Because I'm very confused by the rotary tool. Looking at this, I just noticed one of my screws has come loose from the x-axis thing. I better tighten all those down. Anyway, I've connected this where the x-axis would be connected, so it's not really a fourth axis, it's just a different third axis. I also tried to go through this math that was in the instruction manual that came with it. It looks like I have to replace the x-axis pulse setting parameters with 140 for this diameter. So I still don't really understand G-code, but I think if I go into the console, I think what I'm supposed to do here is change $100 to 140. All right, I'm gonna send that. I flipped this over to vertical, so we are using the y-axis to run up and down our cylinder, and the x-axis is driving this. That just seemed a little simpler to me because then I only need the one cable from the x-axis motor, and I broke that cable on the y-axis earlier, or it came broken, so I didn't really want to mess with those just because they're a little more fragile. So let's see, if I start moving the x-axis on the touchscreen, I think it'll run this motor now. Now, one problem with that is if I want to engrave this lengthwise, I might have to just switch the whole thing around again. I don't know how to swap the X and Y axes in Candle. I could do like a 20-minute video on how many times I've had to do this Z-probe thing. This could really benefit from an automatic function for this. It's actually really hard to get this out of here. I guess I have to unbolt the whole rotary assembly. Well, that looks like it worked really well. We have a rotary engraving on a cylindrical dowel. Now, the thing still left a lot of debris inside the cuts here, and I'm still figuring that out. I messed around with some of the settings on the laptop. I think if we had a different material, maybe a different depth of cut, maybe a different speed, it would do a little bit differently. So again, those are all factors that I need to learn about. There are a lot of variables when it goes into this thing, and I need to learn feed speed, movement speed, cutting speed, depth, angle, all kinds of stuff. So that is going to continue to be homework for me. But for someone like me who has never done a rotary engraving before, had no idea what the manual was trying to tell me, and has never done any routing before, I actually managed to get an engraving on a cylinder, and I think that's pretty cool. Well, so far I am actually pretty happy with the TwoTrees TTC-450 CNC router. I'm gonna take these glasses off. Yeah, it routes well, it does cylinders, it does flat stuff, it does very detailed work. The detail on that little flower was fantastic. Yeah, there was some sawdust in there and some stuff I would have to clean up later, but still, that is really cool how fine of detail it can create on a piece of wood. Now, I think I said at the beginning I would be very fair and honest with this. I would give you the minuses right along with the pluses, and there were some downsides with this. A lot of them had to do with assembling it. It took me forever to get this assembled, like 4 hours. Part of that, yes, is that it was cold out. My fingers kept getting cold, so it was taking me longer to work with small pieces, small fasteners. This is a machine you really have to think about where it's going to live. I don't want it to live in the house because it does make a mess. It throws sawdust and plastic everywhere. So the garage is kind of my only option, and I have limited heat in the garage. It can only really get up to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. So think about that if you're buying one of these. Where are you going to put it? Are you going to have it somewhere that your fingers are going to get cold? This has a lot of small pieces. not only for assembly, but also for changing tools out, for swapping things around. There is a lot of detailed, dexterous manipulation to be done, and if your fingers are cold, it's not going to work as well. Likewise, think about how much space it's going to take up. The machine itself is not terribly huge, but you also need space for the laptop, all the extra parts. You need space for the power supply if you've got the extra motor. So it does take up a little bit of extra real estate in the garage. And then if you are a brand new beginner, if you have never done any routing, any CNC work, like myself, think about how much time it's going to take. There's a big learning curve with CNC stuff, with any CNC machine, with any router like this. So that is not specific to the TwoTrees unit, but it is going to take a long time to figure out what you're doing. Specific to the TwoTrees unit, the instructions were not super clear on a lot of things, and I had to puzzle my way through some stuff, especially with the rotary tool, especially with setting things up, like which direction some things go in, how some of the covers and wires get run. That was not super clear. The instructions did a pretty good job, but there were definitely some gaps. There were definitely things that got glossed over. And speaking of the wires, those were pretty fragile. That one on the y-axis broke immediately. I was able to fix it. My hot glue is holding, but I'm a little leery of touching that again. I don't want to mess with that wire. I don't want to unplug that again, just because those y-axis motor wires are pretty fragile. That's about it for the downsides. On the plus side, this thing is very powerful, especially with the 500 watt motor. The little motor that it comes with, the 80 watt, seems okay for wood, it seems okay for plastic, for light duty stuff, but the 500 watt motor definitely makes things go faster. It definitely lets me run through 200% feed speed and kind of blast through projects in a lot less time than the default motor that it comes with. As far as the design of the thing, it seems like they have definitely improved some things over the very early versions. I looked at some other reviews where people talked about different problems with the fitment, different things rubbing. I still have issues with my wires back here rubbing, but I threw some duct tape around there and it seems to be fine. The other things that other people had trouble with in the past seem to have been fixed with this version. So they've definitely taken other people's suggestions and improved their build quality, improved their design a little bit, and that's great. That is a good thing for a company to do, to get feedback from their users and improve their product. As far as actually working with the machine, it's very easy to swap tools out. It's very easy to swap out. Even the big motor here, this big motor is actually easier to install and remove than the little motor, so that's kind of fun. The rotary tool is actually pretty easy to install and set up, and it was actually way easier to use this than I thought. I thought the rotary tool was going to be very confusing, but it pretty much made sense once I stopped thinking of it as a fourth axis and just as an alternate third axis. Likewise, mounting your actual workpiece, your product, onto the wasteboard here, onto the base, is super easy. It has all those threaded holes in the base, so you can thread in different little mounting clamps, you can thread in accessories like the rotary tool. That's super convenient. The little touch screen is very intuitive. All the controls on there make sense. The emergency stop button is here right where you want it. I've used some other tools where you have to reach way around to the back to find the e-stop, and having it right here on top is pretty handy. Although I have bumped it once or twice just moving my arms across the thing. So yeah, overall, I think this is a really cool CNC router. I am definitely looking forward to learning more about this. I have a lot to learn about how to use this, how to make my own designs, how to find designs online, throw them into the software, get them set up, get them resized. Basically just everything about CNC routing I need to learn more about, and I am really looking forward to doing that. I think this is going to be a great machine to teach me that. I don't have a whole lot of aluminum stock around, but maybe in the future that's something we can play with. I would love to make some aluminum parts. I would love to make more plastic parts, and I think this is going to be a really nice addition to my workshop, especially in conjunction with things like laser engravers, which TwoTrees also offers, and I also really enjoyed their laser engraver. I thought that was really cool. This thing in conjunction with a laser engraver, a laser cutter, those are a really powerful set of tools for your home workshop or your small business. Big thank you again to TwoTrees for sponsoring this video, sponsoring my channel by giving me a really cool tool like this. I think we will definitely be getting more use out of this in the future, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what I can do with it. As usual, I will throw links to the main CNC router and all the accessories down in the description, and you can check those out for yourself, as well as all the other products that TwoTrees offers. I hope this has been a useful and helpful review, even if I am not an expert on CNC routing. Finally, thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.